hit record right now.
Do you want, Berta, you've got it? Okay.
Yep, I just hit it. And so as I mentioned earlier, if you can just add your name after, pardon me, add your club name after your name, that would be great. So we have a couple of guests this morning. Oh, hello. And I'm gonna try something because I just learned something that's not what I wanted. I learned something and it clearly didn't work. We have two guests on with us this evening, and this is, so I'm gonna stop my share for a second and give you a little bit of information about our two guests and why they're on with us tonight. And that is because I can come up onto my screen. Okay, I hate it when I do this. So Jennifer is, we have Jennifer Edwards and Katie McCleary on tonight. Jennifer's a business advisor and leadership coach. She works with Fortune 500 companies, brokerage firms, multi-level market clients, and entrepreneurs. And she is all about coaching her clients to manage their biological reactions when pressure, stress, and anxiety hit. And she coaches people to embrace their vulnerability and uniqueness in order to lead bravely. She values collaboration, community impact, strategy, and integrity. She's a former NCAA athlete. She's a college professor, global trainer, and public speaker. And she's passionate about bringing learning, strategy, play, and adventure to people. She lives in the foothills of Northern California, and she enjoys time with her family. So Katie McCleary is a social entrepreneur and change maker driven to make the world less lonely and more connected through her work as a community leader, writer, publisher, and innovator. And she is the co-founder and host of the Drive podcast on Capital Public Radio in partnership with the American Leadership Forum. And it showcases personal moments and transformative stories of Sacramento's region's most visible leaders. She was in 2015 named Katie, Mashable.com named Katie as Real Miss America for her work with vulnerable populations. And she lives on a hobby farm in Northern California with a sociology professor, their two kids, and a feisty menagerie of furry and feathered friends. So these two gals are working together to write a book, and it's called Bridging the Gap. And so we are going to be basically, I asked them to come on board and not to do a presentation per se, but just join in our conversation because it is very much on topic with what we were going to talk about today. So if I can talk and do two things at one time, it would be really nice, but why is that not working? Oh, because I'm trying to do two things at once. Oh, I just love it. You see, we've been doing this all year and you wouldn't know it, right? Okay, forgive me for just a second. So while I'm trying to get my screen on board, do any of you have questions for Katie or Jennifer just for coming on board?
Well, I did ask her a question. I asked Jennifer what sport she played in college, because I played college sports too, but she said tennis. And now I'm really jealous because she's dialing in on a single-digit golf handicap. And
one away.
Oh, come on. Oh my gosh, that's great. I am much farther away than that. So good job.
Thank you. So fun.
Okay.
It is fun.
So now I'm going to share that. Hopefully. Yay, it worked. Okay, sorry you guys. Took me just a second to get in there. Well, interestingly, you two may actually know him. We just had our district conference, which we called Rally, this past week ago. And one of our keynote speakers was Roger Crawford. Do you two know Roger?
I have not met him, but I've heard of him. But yeah.
From Granite Bay also, and a tennis champion and a collegiate tennis champion. So anyway, we are going to proceed here. So welcome to Katie and Jennifer. And what we're going to talk about today is different perspectives and difficult, difficult conversations, as well as different perspectives. Last time when we talked about teams and teamwork, and some of the takeaways that we had was that teams take trust and respect of each other. Good teams do have differences of opinion, and aren't afraid to share them. They work it out. They differ from groups, and they're not in the fact that they're not just working toward common goals, but they have common goals and not just a common interest. And all team members have a role. And in the leadership, it tends to be more like the geese, where one, especially in Rotary, where one takes the forward role and then they move off. Because in Rotary, we only have leadership for a year typically. So we take turns and rotate in that role. And so one of the things I thought about is that how does, this whole idea of good teams have differences of opinion, but aren't afraid to share ideas. We really needed to talk about a little bit, just a brief intro to team development. Does anyone know what the 4 stages typically are of team development? And why disagreement is normal when groups develop? What happens when we first get together as people who we don't know each other? We just come together as a group. In fact, we kind of said it in a couple times on this call. At first, you just come together. What's that called? Anyone know? It's basically when we form. We just come together to form, right? The first step when you come together in a group or even in a team is you have to form. You have to get to know who everybody is. You have to start to get comfortable with each other. And what happens once you start to get comfortable typically is this stage right here, and it's called storming. It's like, where do we agree and where do we disagree? You start to find those boundaries or their differences, and it's totally normal. And then the third stage is this over here on the map where everybody's working together, and that's usually called norm, where people start to get normalized and start to work together, and it's like, oh, okay, I know how to work with you, I know what my role is, and we start to work together. And finally, when people really get together, the last stage is called perform, because everybody's working at their maximum. They're willing and able to put their ideas out there, put new ideas out, and not be afraid of getting it out there and building on new ideas, even if they don't.
Tessa has her hand raised, Berta.
Tessa, thank you.
I'm sorry, I missed the term you used for the 4th one.
Perform. So
Perform. Okay.
we have form, storm, norm, and perform. It's an approach that's been out there for a long time, and it's not critical that we go into a lot of the detail, but I think that just to know that this is the normal thing that happens when groups get together or you have a new member join your club, all of a sudden it changes a little bit the dynamics of the team, right? And for those of you who attended Rally and you heard Jenny Stotts talking about membership, she said that same thing. You bring a new member into the club, everything shifts a little bit because there's new needs, there's new personalities, there's new ideas out there. Anyway, I think this is important again because the second stage of development, and you don't stay in these stages. You can jump back and forth. But the second stage of storming is quite normal, but a lot of people are afraid of it or uncomfortable with it. So here you go. Those are the names.
You know, Berta, I love what you're mentioning. And the reason I think it's so important is when we're aware, we understand what's happening. When we're blind, it's when we get triggered. You know, awareness is the key to any conversation, and I know this is like obvious to all of us, but it's just so important that if we can name something, it doesn't have as much power.
Oh, that's so true. It's just often, we call it a lot of times when something's going on in our club. I know in our clubs it happens a lot, and we call it the elephant in the room, right? There's something undercurrent that's happening and no one wants to talk about it because it's like, oh, what's going to happen? But if we don't, it just sits there. Anybody have experience with that in your clubs or in a committee you're on or anything of that nature? Form, storm, norm, and perform is pretty common. So
also thinking about external influences, right? So when you're part of a team, you're building your own particular culture, which is that norming part, which you learn from both storming and performing. So like you said, right? Like you go in and out of these different ways, whether you're forming, storming, norming within your group, but then you have like those external influences, and those also really shake things up. And I think that is sometimes where the real rubber meets the road, where the external storm happens, and how does that shake everything up inside?
Yeah, we had an interesting experience in my Rotary Club. This was a couple of years back, but we had a member who was a county supervisor, and a new member came in, and he ended up running for county supervisor against this member. It's like, oh. And that really created some major conflict within our club because you didn't want to support one or the other, or at least verbally say it, because it was like, who do you support? But it was uncomfortable, and it was an external influence, if you will, because it shouldn't have had anything to do with our Rotary Club, but it did impact us. So why do you think disagreement is normal when we are in a group or a team or a club? Anybody have a thought about why it's normal?
Well, we're not clones.
That's right, we're not. Thank goodness, right? What would happen if we were all clones? How much would we get done as a club?
Well, there'd be no new ideas.
Less creativity.
Absolutely.
Actually, Berta, I was thinking, because often, when you look at a club, about 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And I'm looking at this and I said, well, probably the 20% are really the ones that are making this performance. What can we do as a leader to change things so that we're getting 80% of the club now working through these four things and making a performance?
Well, I think that's a little different conversation, Walt, but I think one of the things is that a lot of times people don't get engaged because they don't feel heard.
Yeah.
They put out an idea and someone goes, "Ugh, that won't work. We've tried that before," right? So what happens the next time they have an idea?
It's not going to happen.
They don't share it. But good point. And that is, yes.
Yeah, I find that probably that's one of the top difficulties of our Rotary clubs is people not knowing how to accept something new or be willing to listen to something new, especially some of our clubs with long time older members. It's just really hard to break through.
Yeah, and so it may not be it may be a verbal disagreement where someone says, we've tried that, or, we don't do things that way. Or it may be more subtle, and it's just that understated disagreement, right? And disconnect between what the rest of the new members, for example, want. But I think that's true. So how do you address that? How do you get people to say, what about a new idea? How do we move that direction?
I would love to hear what Katie and Jennifer have to say about that.
So I'm going to let Jennifer start first because there's a lot of knowledge sort of about the brain and what happens when we are confronted with new information or we're forming in a new group with a new reality and others. And then we'll probably talk a little bit about the mind.
There, I needed to get myself off mute. I think it's actually really interesting. All of this can go play. Berta, can I ask you to go back to the whole screen? Sometimes it's easier when we can see everybody, if that would be okay.
Sure. There you go.
Actually, did you know that our brains are hardwired to avoid pain and change? Like literally hardwired. So when you actually think about a new Rotarian coming in or wanting to change the culture of how people sign up for activities or introducing a new project into your group, the brain wants to say no right away because it's moving itself off what it doesn't know. And as simple as it might seem, or as crazy as it might seem, people will hear this conversation in two paradigms. Yeah, when somebody hears a new idea, their brain literally says rejection, rejection. And there are tons of hormones, cortisol, testosterone, epinephrine that rushes to the prefrontal cortex where logic sits and literally says, I don't know about this. I better not touch this. It might harm me. So essentially, you need to understand these are people who are actually living in their biology, 100% unaware that a hormone cocktail is absolutely navigating their logic center. So if you actually, honey, you can come in. If you actually understand the reality of what's happening on the brain, you can very quickly change how you approach things. Katie, how would you add to that?
So when Jennifer's talking about the brain and hormone and chemicals, we're actually talking about your physical organs, your physical biological body. But what about the mind? What about the power of your thought and your intellect and your choice, right? So when you couple the mind with the mind immediately wants to reject change as well, unless there is already a file in your brain that you have an experience with whatever's being proposed. And if your experience in the past is negative, you're immediately going to shut it down and keep on going. If you don't have the file at all in your brain, right? So we make decisions and have a mind based off our lived experiences. And if we haven't created that file in the brain and it's a completely new idea or new way of doing something, we immediately reject it too. So I'm going to toss it back to Jennifer because there is hope, but it requires that we approach things really differently when we actually do want to instigate change, or we want to be open enough to be able to hear without bias what people are actually proposing to change.
So before you go on, one of the things that hold on, sorry, little menagerie issue going on right here. It triggers to me one of the reasons why it is so hard to change, right? If we don't have an experience, or we've had a negative experience in the past, those are both the negatives to hold us back. And you think about our thousands of years of development as human beings, or is it development? It makes you wonder, why does it take so long to change?
Yeah.
Berta, brilliant.
Immune. So there's a whole theory called immunity to change theory. It comes out of Harvard, and And it's pretty amazing that basically says that change is really hard because we have built a system to be immune to it. So we have to actively work with intention to bypass our biological and what we also call our biographical, your experiences in the past, reaction to being introduced to change.
So one of the comments in the chat just now was from Scott saying that he's, put out a lot of ideas to his club members and he feels like most of them have been shot down. And Gail said, you're not alone that happens. So, I think there's, obviously it's what can we do, what other people can do, but we can't control them. What's something that we can do to start to help to change the group, I guess you could say, because we can't control the rest of them.
Yeah.
You want to take that, Katie, or you want me to?
I want you to. Are you
Okay.
gonna talk about 4 options, maybe?
I actually want to talk about basic human emotional needs first.
Awesome, cool.
Scott, everybody, people reject things for one core reason. They're not getting their basic emotional needs met. As simple as ridiculous as that sounds, the deep need for people to be seen, valued, understood, and can be able to contribute navigates how people interpret situations presented to them. So the question I'd always have to ask you is, when you are presenting an idea, are you presenting it in a way that speaks to the person's emotional need that they would bite on it? I can suggest a lot of ideas that are really important to my daughter. Do you think she bites on them? Only if somewhere in them, well, she might if it's force and pressure, right? Only if somewhere in them, I am meeting her need to be understood, valued, accepted, and absolutely seen.
So does that come back to the whole concept of what's in it for me when we hear that concept being told about, that we should, think about what the other person needs, right?
Absolutely. It's called the platinum rule. People one of the best rules out there we've always thought is treat others how you want to be treated. Actually, we need to upgrade that rule. Treat others how they want to be treated. If I'm going to speak to Walt and convince Walt of what I want to do, I need to understand how his brain processes information, what his needs are, and how I can deliver a message so that he can see and hear and find resonancy with it. Half the time messages fail because we aren't delivering a resonant message that meets the needs of the people in front of us. It might be a great idea. It might be one that'll save the world. But unless I'm telling the brain in front of you, hey, you matter. You can contribute. I see you. Somehow, if we're missing that step, even if we don't mean to be, we've lost.
So there's, I can hear my own inside going, but that's not fair. What people should be open to listening to hear. Sorry, Gail, but it's true, right? Isn't that way we act? It's like, why aren't they listening to me? I have a need too, and I need to be heard. So how do we start to shift the culture within a group or a team or a club so that that's more of the norm for everybody and not just for, it's not just us who has to make sure that their needs are met, right?
Kathy Wilcox Barn has her hand up.
Oh,
I think Berta might have just kind of segued into what I was going to ask. Are there some key ways that we present our ideas, that some words or some ways that we present our ideas that reach the people's need or them being heard?
Yeah, if you really want to bridge the gap with someone, one is that we've talked a lot about in the team one about trust and respect, right? And if you really want to have trust and respect with someone, you have to know them. And so we teach a lot about what it means to know yourself first, and then what it means to know another person. Because however you sort of, and I'm going to back up. So however you manage yourself, it's not how that other person manages themselves. And there's a little bit of sort of ninja Star Wars Jedi trickery that has to happen is that if I know you, I know what your values are, and I know what you care about, and I know what your story is. And so without making judgments or inferrals as best you can, right, you're going to try to meet the person where they're at. And you have to, for lack of a better term, listen, see, hear, stroke their ego, and you have to know them, right? And then when it gets time to sort of introduce your idea to change, it's about working together to help them co-author that idea with you. It's not prescriptive, right? And that's hard when you're working in a large group environment and you may be having to reach consensus by a lot of people, right? So you're already set up in a structure, in a container that's about a debate. It's about a vote, right? And so that's what makes this tough. Whereas if you were in one-to-one relationships, you probably could navigate to a decision or a change factor that's more consensual between both of you. But you're already in a dynamic where it's like, hey, I want to present this change and I want this and that. So you're speaking to a membership. And so you have to present, I think, at least 3 to 4 options, not just your option. And Jennifer, do you want to talk about maybe the order of those options?
Yeah. Berta, are we talking too much or would you like us to continue? Because I know you have a slide deck.
The
Fine.
slide deck is just there as the facilitator to move us forward. So as long as we're yeah, Gail's going, more, give us more. Because I think what you're giving us is some ideas here. But I do want to make sure that any of you who have questions or comments or, just want to be involved in this conversation, we do want it to be a conversation and not just Jennifer and Katie talking. So yes, those 4 things next. So what's the order of those?
Let me just actually give you a little Yoda trick that works every time. Do any of you like to be told what to do? Any of you? Okay. And if you're told what to do, what do you typically want to do?
No.
The opposite. Push back, screw you, no way. Like you get to judgment about it, right? The brain, Scott, never wants to be given one option. It will be guaranteed to reject the option, no matter how brilliant it is. 2 options actually is no better. When the brain receives 2 options, it goes to paralysis, analysis, splitting. The brain unconsciously goes to life or death, mom or dad, light or dark. Opposites that the brain actually polarizes. So whenever you want to suggest a new idea, 1 idea, they will reject. 2 ideas, they will split. But neurochemically, when the prefrontal cortex receives 3 options, all of which are acceptable to you, Scott, 3 options that you present, the brain feels like it has authorship. It feels like it has, I have choice. I'm empowered. I have an opportunity to see something differently. I have agency. So if you really want agency, and agency is what gets engagement. Let me say that again. When people feel like they have agency, they have engagement. You need to always remember that the brain wants 3 options. So even when I'm with my husband, when I'm with my children, I offer 3 options that are acceptable for me and healthy so that engagement increases.
Okay, so could we just try to give an example for in a Rotary Club? So a change. So Scott, you mentioned you brought up a couple of ideas. Was it a project that you were suggesting or a change in process? Name one thing that you were trying to change up.
Okay, you can hear me now, right?
Yep.
Okay. I had an idea to do something called a blue plate special. It was my own idea where we try to entice people to join Rotary with an actual blue plate and, that type of thing. It was just an outreach kind of deal, public relations kind of deal. And I presented it as well as I could. But you're right, I did not present any other options but to do nothing. And so they chose nothing. They just don't want to do any kind of anything that remotely is different than what they've been doing for many, many years.
So it was about outreach, but your goal.
Right.
Was to try to outreach. Okay.
Right.
You know, Scott, you actually said something really important that I want to remember.
Okay.
No option is always an option,
Right.
especially if you put it on the board as an option. So one of the things you can
Three
always do, go ahead, Katie, what?
I was gonna say, as one of the three choices,
Yeah.
we can do this, this, or nothing, and things will stay the same.
It's
That's
a,
always-
it's a wonderful option to put on the table and to really say like, hey, there's three choices here. Having listened to the group, we can do nothing and things will stay the same. And that's just a choice we have. We can bring the blue plates out, or we can do a membership drive, blah, 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 you know.
Mhm.
And then you literally energetically turn it over to the group and say, like, drop your energy and say, what would be best for the group? And if they feel your energy coming in on you, it's going to feel like pressure. If they feel your energy saying, I'm detached, you have way more chance of them choosing something. Remember, no one wants to be caged. Put me in a corner, I come out fighting. Give me options and give me agency, I come out engaged.
This is wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you for being curious enough.
But I was also reminded about emotional needs. So for me, the number one takeaway in that is that this was about outreach and recruitment. So I'm a professional fundraiser. I ask people to give me money for a living. Nobody likes to do that job, right? Because we're scared to ask someone to join us to do something. And most people hate that.
Yeah.
They hate it. It makes them feel naked. What if somebody tells them no? What if they don't think our Rotary Club is good enough for them? What if it's too expensive and that's a barrier? What if I can't see them face, like it brings up so much emotional terror for people. Even the strongest, most outgoing people in the world don't want to ask. So for me, when I hear the blue plate thing, what I see in your story and your idea, and you and I are probably a lot of alike in this, which is like, let's make it fun. Hey, I'm honoring you with a blue plate and you're going to come to Rotary and we're going to, be in this community together and do good work, right? That freaks people out probably because now it was this blue plate thing. And it was already hard enough for them to just ask when it was, here's the website and the application and come to a meeting with me and meet people. So the approach is also acknowledging always what's the blockage here to recruitment. And people will say, well, people are too busy. They're too overtaken. They don't have enough time. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough energy, right? Like those blocks will always be there. But I think there could have been a different way to say, hey, let's make it fun and easy. If they accept the blue plate, they do or not. It's better than a yes or no. Do you know what I'm saying? Without really knowing in detail what you had proposed. But to know that might be one reason why they said no. I think it sounds like a great idea.
Ew.
But it was literally, people are scared.
So that's one of the things I think we see a lot is a lot in our clubs where especially a newer member throws out ideas of things to suggest for change or improvement or just something new to try, and they get shot down. And then it's hard to come back and try again. But I think that because of our time, what other kinds of difficult conversations are there going on in our clubs, or what kind of difficult conversations do we need to have? And Chess, I'm going to kind of ask to you because you were one of the originals who wanted to have this conversation. And so I'm kind of curious where you were coming from in terms of what specifically would help to
Well,
where you were going.
I actually think it was a psychic event on my part. Because 2 days ago, I had my first challenge as a not yet president. And I'm going to share it, and I'm uncomfortable comfortable doing this, but I think it's important for all of us to know that one of the things we're all facing is how do you transition from Zoom meetings to in-person meetings? And what is the COVID protocol that allows people who do decide to do that to feel safe? So we made the decision, we found our venue. We came to an agreement on how to charge people for this venue and for their meals. And then I decided I needed to send out a COVID protocol, which I pulled directly from CDC and outlined what the difference is between eating outside versus eating inside, and that we're Rotarians. And in the state of Nevada and the city of Reno, we know what the rules are. So here's a set of rules. And somebody responded back, I think 2 people, and said, well, how do we know who's had a vaccination? And I thought, okay. So I sent out another email and I said, the question has arisen. Who has been vaccinated? Would you please respond with a yes or no? And I got 27 responses. We have a club of 34 and about 3 fairly inactive people that I wasn't necessarily expecting a response from, but I'm giving those numbers to tell you we had a very large response. And one person came back and said, you can't ask that question because that's a slippery slope. So you start with asking about vaccinations. The next thing, are you going to ask us about what your political affiliation is? Are you going to ask us what your religious preference is? Are you going to tell us that you have to tell us whether you are homosexual or whether you're a gender, there's gender differences that you're expressing? And my response was, everything that you gave me, religion, political, and gender identification, have nothing to do with health. Asking someone whether or not they have had their vaccine is a very comfortable way for some people to feel safer. And on the other side of that coin, if I ask you and you don't want to respond, I cannot compel you to respond. So I will not retract the question. And the next email I got was, if you don't retract the question, I'm going to resign from the club. So I decided I had nothing more to say. And I waited until we could converse about it. And 10 minutes later, the resignation letter came through, resignation email.
So,
And again, I did not respond to that because I have said everything that needs to be said. And, but it's, you start wondering, I'm hearing what you wonderful women are telling us about how to communicate, how to find that space of commonality. But I do believe there are sometimes you're dealing with people who have another agenda that you have no way of touching into. And all I can do is be respectful and be logical and present my situation and not fall into an argumentative path and not be bullied into retracting something that for me was very important. For me personally, and from what I'd heard from most of my members, it's extremely important. It is not a HIPAA violation, by the way. I've already done all the research. It is simply asking a question that in today's world, coming back into an in-person meeting is extremely important for most people. And again, I cannot compel you to answer. He resigned. And that's a conflict situation that I said had to be psychic because I didn't have any at the time. It was just, I guess I felt it coming.
so Chessa, hold on that thought. Bruce, I did see your hand raised. Did you want to make a comment? No. Okay. I think, Chessa, you did have this experience, and I have a feeling you're not going to be the only one, whether it's a current club president or an incoming president.
And that's why, as uncomfortable as I am about this, because it's only 2 days ago, and I don't want to say negative things about my club or my members, but I think all of us in some respect are going to face this situation. And I think we need to be able to respond to it non-emotionally, with facts, with sensitivity, and with the understanding that you're not wrenching somebody's arm to get this information. You're just saying many people in our club want to know.
So just curious, was your conversation with this one person a one-on-one exchange, or was it to the whole group and it included?
It was email between he and I, and his resignation was to a group of people. And he said, and you can read the thread below. And I was to myself was saying, thank you. Thank you for including the thread, because I stand by everything I said. I stand behind the fact that I was respectful to you and I gave you the opportunity to not respond. And instead you decided to die on that hill. And that's why I think there's more sometimes. The other aspect of this is he's attended one meeting in a year. And
so it might have also, it might have been an excuse to go there.
And that to me sometimes is something that we can only go so far in this engagement process. And if the other person does have another agenda, you just have to step back and allow that agenda play itself out.
Also, just to know, and I know, Scott, you mentioned a comment there too, not everybody is going to get a vaccine. Not everybody is going to be in agreement on this topic. I think that, to me, and I'd love input from Katie and Jennifer, but I think looking for where are you in agreement? I think everybody wants to feel safe. And so maybe starting from what is it that we agree about would that be an approach to take so that everybody can come back together and feel safe in our Rotary Club meetings?
And I do believe that is what I did with we went through the venue process and we got agreement on that. And then we went to the protocol, and I sent that out, and people said, thank you for doing that, because they felt they knew what was expected of them and what they could expect of everyone else. And there was one outlier that.
Well, and you're going to find that some clubs are totally the opposite, that they really don't care. They want to get together, and they're, whether you're vaccinated or not, it doesn't matter to them. They just want to be together, and everybody sort of goes along with it. So I think there's not one scenario that's right, but I think that you did run up against someone who was firm in terms of a pushback. Katie?
We have hands raised, Berta. We have Kathy
good.
and
Okay.
Bruce and Helene.
Thank you. Did you see who was first? Kathy?
I think Bruce and Helene were.
Bruce was.
Bruce?
Right.
I think the question that I have relative to this, and I think we'll have a lot more of it, it's not so much, and the way I would approach it, it's not so much that I'm going to pass judgment on you, whether you're vaccinated or not, but I need to know how I should react, because I have I'm 82 years old, so I'm worried a little bit about my own health. If you're not vaccinated, that's fine and dandy, but I can shape my actions based upon that knowledge. And I think it's only fair for somebody who's not vaccinated to be willing to say, I'm not vaccinated.
And they still may be welcome, but socially distanced or something of that nature. There might be other things that
That's
you
at
can
the
do.
other end of the room.
Yeah.
You're right. I actually addressed that in the COVID framework. And I said, if you are not vaccinated, you may want to consider sitting separate from some of the other people for your own safety. If we know that, we will make sure that we don't jeopardize or risk. We didn't want to add risk to it. So that was in the other email before I asked the question. And I really made every attempt to say, this is not a judgment. This is not political. This is simply some people want to know who is vaccinated and who's not, so that, as you're saying, Bruce, so they can make their own decision.
So Kathy, did you have a comment or a question or?
Mine isn't on this topic, so if somebody else has a follow-up on this, I just have a question about another, thing about dealing with conflict. So if someone else has more on this, on Chessa's situation, I'll pass for now.
Chessa, I think that, you know, you stated things clearly. It sounds like you stated them with your reasons, and you gave options. And you know, we all do have our choices as well. And it sounds like there was a person who had a choice to make. I don't know that there's a right or a wrong here. It's just it still feels like a conflict. And I think that's part of, I know as a leader, it's what you get into and you feel like, did I do the right thing? Do I do for it? But I would like, if you're okay with it, unless there's another specific comment around that, I would like to move on. Is there anything that you could add, Jennifer, Katie, that might?
In one sentence, I'll make it really simple.
Good.
You're dealing with a scared brain. Scared brains are irrational. They're emotional and they're divisive. When a brain is scared, the more you push on it, the more it will rebel. If there's one thing you could do is you could sit down and say, Joe, we are in tough times. I know how many different opinions are out there and I care about you. So tell me a little bit about what you're thinking so I can understand where you're sitting. Because you give him that time, there's a chance he'll bend and change. There is. I mean, I promise you, look at what's happening in our politics, but the brain is scared. It's a caged tiger.
Well, and it goes back to something you said earlier about, or Katie said it about, we all need to feel seen and heard. And if he didn't feel seen or heard, perhaps
Chessa didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
We're just acknowledging that his brain was scared. Chessa, you did the best you could with the skills you had in that moment. And just remember, his brain is as scared as yours.
So I'm going to ask us to
And
move
we only
on.
have 7 minutes and I have a hard stop, guys. So.
I know. So Kathy, you had a question or a comment or a
I
direct?
had a question. In our club, we have a member that is very engaged, very active, but also very, you just never know where they're going to be at one point or another. And during board meetings or whatever, somebody might say something, hardly anything, and this person just goes down people's throats, or in a meeting will do that, or just very caustic comments and stuff. And because he's such an because this person is such an active member, nobody wants to address the poor behavior. And people are afraid now to even bring up anything. They walk on eggshells around him, which gives a lot of power. So I'm not president anymore. I'm not saying this is not my problem. It's the whole club that is suffering. Do you have any suggestions for that kind of conflict resolution?
I was going to open it up and see if there's any wisdom in the group that wants to answer first. I have one idea, but any ideas?
You know, I part of me just feels that someone has to have the courage to say, you know, that really hurt. Or, wow, you know, I don't understand what just triggered your frustration. I mean, or your anger. Somehow either acknowledging your own perspective and what's going on in you, or acknowledging his scared brain, so to speak, because it feels like he's not really engaged. But if you either share your humanity or connect into his, it feels like that might be a way to at least assuage it.
I wonder what he gets out of doing it. I'm going to get really curious just about that person. I mean, whenever I meet somebody who starts to kind of rub on me the wrong way, I immediately have to go to curiosity, or else I'm going to villainize them. to just appease my own irritation. So there's this Taoist saying, which is that nobody is trying to be unhappy. Even the most unhappiest people in the world, angry, storming, walking around, causing chaos, they're not trying to be unhappy. So there's a payoff. And so I need to be curious about what the payoff is. And sometimes maybe that's how this person releases their pressure valve with, maybe that's how they express power. And because nobody's approaching him about that, he's allowed to do it and continue, right? So I think the person or the persons who may become real curious about this person, right, begin to understand what's the payoff for him to act this way. And then I think it's going to take a real, it won't work for you to have a sit down conversation and confront them about it, right? It's going to actually take coaching, and it's going to take patience, and it's going to take saying, hey, when you do that, it doesn't land for me because that's not the person I know. I see you as an amazing Rotarian who's engaged and does this and gets this done. But man, I notice sometimes when this happens, you lose trust and respect. I'm telling you, this man wants trust and respect and pride, right? I noticed that when you engage in that behavior, I kind of noticed how it turned people off. And that is not the person that I know.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really excellent point and an excellent approach. Obviously, it would need to be one-on-one
and even curious, like what?
And curious,
why do you do that?
What about just offering support to the person that just got torn apart?
Yep.
Absolutely. You're doing that at the same time. So really, we have to be leaders in our relationships. Leaders is, it's not about what we think, it's about how we think.
And I think it's not just one person, a leader, just not the president of the club, but each of us as leaders of our own life and our own experiences, right? So that's standing up to that and coming across. You don't have to be condemning, like victimizing or villainizing. I love that word. But I think that's a really good approach. Chessa, and I know Jennifer, you have.
Berta,
Thank you. Thank you.
Berta, yeah, it's 6:29.
Yeah, so we need.
I just want to say something quickly. I believe, I agree with all of that. However, I don't believe that my role is to be somebody's coach. And I don't believe that as a club member, it's my job to allow another person to hijack the entire meeting and let everyone else be victimized by it. So at some point you have to say, if this doesn't stop, we're going to have to go to that next step. And that's when it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, and I know Jennifer has to leave right at 6.
He does too. We're going to something together, so I hate to.
No, and if any of you want to stay on for a few minutes to wrap up this piece, I'm happy to stay, or we can wrap up. But Jennifer and Katie, I think you've given us some things to think about.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to seeing or hearing more about your book. Howtobridgethegap.com is where you can find out more about the two of them and their journey, because they've had quite a journey together and individually. And they were actually speakers at Tahoe Incline, I believe. Anyway, it's great.
Auburn.
Auburn, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Back again.
Bye.
Thank you very much for being on. Appreciate it. I hate it when we're in the middle of a conversation and have to stop. It's just so frustrating. But Chessa, I remember something within my club where, actually going back to that same experience I talked to you about the supervisor who he was running, he put something out in the newspaper that was condemning of the fellow Rotarian and as a board, we came together and we actually said, what you just said in the paper, you are Rotarian, of the things we think, say, and do. And we actually put them on 90 days probation. We explained it to them. We said, we love you. We want you to be part of this group. We respect you running. But that wasn't Rotarian-like. That wasn't living by the four-way test. And we do that not just when we're in the Rotary Club, but with everything we do in life. And he came, after he kind of went with his tail between his legs, but stop that behavior. That's just one example, but I think you are right that there is a certain point in time that if it's disrupting the club in general, but I also think that someone as an individual can go up to him, whether it's you as the president-elect, or just as another individual, to say, that didn't, like she said, didn't land with me, or, it's like you got the wrong response. You didn't get the response that you're hoping for. You actually broke down the power that you have. We care about you, but that didn't land well.
Yeah, and I agree. I think we make that initial foray and we see if it's possible to come to an accomplished middle. But I think a lot of times people let things go on way too long. I mean, the classic abused woman is not abused usually for 2 weeks. It could be 2 years or more before she acts. And so I kind of look at a club that allows one member to disrupt the rest of them. It's like, you have to make a stop here. You have to draw the line in the sand and say, this is unacceptable behavior. We would like you to understand why. And if you can't, we can't have you stay.
And I think there is just to put it out there, it is important that we need to be open to truly listen to that person, because it may be something that we don't understand or that we didn't get, or maybe it's, maybe their spouse is dying of cancer and they're under a tremendous amount of stress, and it just is coming out that way. So I think that we can't assume until we actually give them the opportunity to share.
You're right. If we can't lead with compassion, we're not leading.
Yeah. So that I just wanted to make sure we put that out there too. We do need to wrap up. So I love you all for coming. We have our next one on May 26th. We don't have a topic on it, so I would love to have any of you throw out some ideas. We could continue with this conversation if you wanted more of it, or we could move on to a different topic. So May 26th, and it's going to be is it the morning, Gail? Let me double check my.
Yeah, I'm not the right person to ask for it.
I have down 10 o'clock in the morning.
It is 10 o'clock. Yeah. Okay, May 26th at 10 a.m. So
yeah, I'm probably not going to be on, Berta, because I'm going to be in Shasta in my RV.
Yay, good for you. Well, I will, I'm planning on being there. So
Okay.
Please, if you have ideas, send me an email and we will figure something out for the next conversation. I hope this was helpful. It was just interesting. Like I said, they came and spoke to the Auburn Rotary Club, and it was fascinating to hear their, that was an actual presentation, but I hope they gave some insights and some thoughts for all of us to consider. Any comments?
Amazing pair of women.
What was that, Bruce?
They're an amazing pair of women.
And they have, just so you know, they are political opposites. And they have, that's part of the interesting part of their story. So anything else to share? Okay, we all have lots to do, lots to think about. And I think we always remember, we are leaders, whether it's of our club or of our own persons. And that's where we lead our lives with joy. And that's what I would like.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thank you. An hour really well spent. Thank you.
Woo! See you on the
Thank you.
26th, I hope.
Okay.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.
Enjoy.
Gail, stay on for a sec.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm here.
Hi, I know. I just want to make sure everyone, up, let's stop recording.